The grand luxury restaurant shimmered under golden chandeliers as Robert Hayes, an elderly black veteran, quietly stepped inside, holding a worn-out wallet in his trembling hands. Robert Hayes walked slowly toward a small corner table, his tired eyes moving across the room filled with wealthy guests, laughing loudly without a care in the world. At a nearby table, Victoria Langford, a powerful businesswoman, laughed confidently with Daniel Brooks, casually pointing around as they enjoyed their expensive dinner. Maya Carter, a young black waitress with kind and observant eyes, noticed Robert Hayes entering and immediately offered a warm, respectful smile. Before we dive in, let us know in the comments what time is it and where are you watching from. Let's start. Robert Hayes carefully pulled out a chair and sat down, placing his old hat beside him, his hands slightly shaking from age, struggle, and silent memories. Maya Carter walked over gently and handed Robert Hayes the menu, speaking with quiet kindness that felt rare in such a proud and judgmental place. Daniel Brooks glanced toward Robert Hayes's simple clothes and worn shoes, smirking slightly before leaning toward Victoria Langford to whisper something. Victoria Langford turned her head, looked directly at Robert Hayes, and let out a soft laugh, clearly judging him without knowing his story or sacrifices. Robert Hayes calmly ordered the cheapest meal on the menu, his voice low but steady, still carrying the dignity of a man who had served his country. Maya Carter carefully wrote down the order, her expression soft with concern, sensing there was a deeper story behind Robert Hayes's quiet presence. As the meal ended, Robert Hayes slowly opened his old wallet and began placing small coins on the table, counting each one with care and dignity. The soft clinking of coins filled the quiet space as Robert Hayes carefully counted each coin, his focus steady despite the heavy silence forming around him. Nearby, Daniel Brooks noticed the coins instantly, his smile turning into a mocking grin as Daniel Brooks nudged Victoria Langford to look closer. Victoria Langford leaned forward slightly, her eyes narrowing at the sight of coins, clearly amused by what Victoria Langford believed was a poor man's struggle. Maya Carter stood still for a moment, watching Robert Hayes with concern, sensing the tension rising as whispers slowly began spreading across the room. Robert Hayes continued placing coins one by one, his hands slightly shaking, yet his face remained calm, holding on to a quiet dignity built over many years. Daniel Brooks chuckled softly, but loud enough to be heard, making a sarcastic comment that caused Victoria Langford to laugh without hesitation. Some nearby guests turned their heads, curious and judgmental, their eyes fixed on Robert Hayes, as if Robert Hayes did not belong in such a place. Maya Carter stepped a little closer to Robert Hayes, her expression serious now, silently hoping the situation would not turn humiliating. Victoria Langford raised her glass slightly, whispering another remark to Daniel Brooks, both clearly entertained by Robert Hayes's way of paying. Robert Hayes paused for a brief second, noticing the laughter, but Robert Hayes chose to continue counting, refusing to show weakness in front of strangers. Daniel Brooks leaned back in his chair, openly pointing toward Robert Hayes now, no longer hiding the mockery as the atmosphere grew uncomfortable. At that moment, the restaurant manager, Thomas Reed, began walking toward Robert Hayes, his face stern as the situation started drawing attention. Thomas Reed, the restaurant manager, approached Robert Hayes with a cold expression, his polished shoes echoing against the marble floor as silence spread. Robert Hayes looked up slowly at Thomas Reed, pausing his counting, his tired eyes calm but alert as the tension around the table grew heavier. Thomas Reed glanced at the scattered coins on the table and frowned deeply, clearly unimpressed by what Thomas Reed considered unacceptable behavior. Daniel Brooks watched eagerly, a smirk forming again, while Victoria Langford leaned back comfortably, expecting an embarrassing scene to unfold. Maya Carter stood a few steps away, her hands slightly clenched, worried that Robert Hayes would be publicly humiliated in front of everyone. Thomas Reed spoke firmly, questioning Robert Hayes about the payment, his tone carrying authority, but lacking any sense of respect or empathy. Robert Hayes replied quietly, explaining that the coins were all Robert Hayes had, each one earned through hard years of service and sacrifice. Thomas Reed sighed impatiently, looking around at the watching guests, clearly more concerned about the restaurant's image than Robert Hayes's dignity. Daniel Brooks laughed under his breath again, whispering something sharp that made Victoria Langford shake her head with quiet amusement. Maya Carter took a step forward, her eyes now filled with determination, unable to ignore the disrespect being shown to Robert Hayes. Robert Hayes lowered his gaze briefly, not out of shame, but out of exhaustion from a lifetime of silent struggles and unseen battles. Thomas Reed then said something louder this time, drawing full attention, turning the moment into open humiliation for Robert Hayes. Thomas Reed raised his voice sharply, telling Robert Hayes that such payment was unacceptable, making sure every guest could hear the humiliation clearly. The entire restaurant fell into an awkward silence as all eyes turned toward Robert Hayes, who sat still, holding on to his dignity despite the pressure. Daniel Brooks leaned forward with a grin, clearly enjoying the moment, while Victoria Langford watched with cold curiosity, waiting to see what would happen next. Robert Hayes slowly lifted his head and looked at Thomas Reed, his eyes calm but filled with a quiet strength built from years of sacrifice. Thomas Reed crossed his arms and demanded proper payment, implying that Robert Hayes should leave if Robert Hayes could not afford the meal. Maya Carter could no longer stay silent and stepped closer, her voice steady as Maya Carter respectfully tried to calm the situation. Thomas Reed turned toward Maya Carter with irritation, signaling Maya Carter to step back, clearly not wanting any interruption in front of the guests. Maya Carter hesitated for a moment, then stood firm, refusing to ignore the injustice happening right in front of her eyes. Robert Hayes gently gathered a few more coins, placing them carefully as if each coin carried a piece of his life story. Victoria Langford shook her head slightly, whispering something dismissive to Daniel Brooks, both continuing to judge without understanding. Daniel Brooks let out a quiet laugh again, his eyes fixed on Robert Hayes, as if watching a scene meant for entertainment. At that moment, Maya Carter made a silent decision, stepping forward with courage, ready to do something that would change everything. Maya Carter stepped forward with quiet courage, her voice steady as Maya Carter told Thomas Reed that the payment was valid and deserved respect. Thomas Reed looked at Maya Carter with sharp annoyance, clearly not expecting a waitress to challenge authority in front of wealthy and influential guests. Robert Hayes glanced at Maya Carter with surprise, his tired eyes softening slightly as someone finally chose dignity over silent judgment. Daniel Brooks rolled his eyes at Maya Carter's words, whispering to Victoria Langford that this was getting unnecessarily dramatic. Victoria Langford smirked faintly, watching closely, curious to see how far Maya Carter would go in defending a stranger like Robert Hayes. Maya Carter then did something unexpected, placing her own money gently on the table beside Robert Hayes's coins without hesitation. The soft sound of bills touching the table shifted the entire atmosphere, turning whispers into stunned silence across the restaurant. Thomas Reed's expression changed instantly, now caught between authority and the growing attention from guests observing the moment. Robert Hayes shook his head slightly, refusing the help at first, wanting to stand on his own despite the difficult situation. Maya Carter leaned closer and spoke softly, assuring Robert Hayes that this was not charity, but respect for a man who deserved honor. Daniel Brooks stopped laughing, his expression slowly changing as the situation no longer felt entertaining, but deeply uncomfortable. In that powerful silence, something unseen began to shift in the room as Maya Carter's simple act started breaking the chain of arrogance. The entire restaurant grew silent as Maya Carter stood beside Robert Hayes, her decision echoing louder than any words spoken in that heavy moment. Thomas Reed looked around nervously, realizing the situation had shifted, and that every guest was now watching how Thomas Reed would respond. Robert Hayes looked at the money placed by Maya Carter, his eyes filled with emotion, not from shame, but from unexpected respect and kindness. Daniel Brooks shifted uncomfortably in his chair, the earlier confidence fading as the moment no longer felt like entertainment, but something serious. Victoria Langford slowly lowered her glass, her expression changing as guilt quietly replaced the judgment that Victoria Langford once carried. Maya Carter gently pushed the money closer and said clearly that Robert Hayes had already paid more than enough with a lifetime of service. Those words hit the room deeply, causing several guests to exchange looks, realizing they had judged Robert Hayes without knowing his past. Thomas Reed cleared his throat, his tone softer now, as the pressure of the moment forced Thomas Reed to reconsider his harsh approach. Robert Hayes straightened his posture slightly, his dignity returning stronger, no longer overshadowed by the humiliation from moments before. Daniel Brooks avoided eye contact, now aware that his behavior had crossed a line that could not be easily ignored or laughed away. Victoria Langford looked directly at Robert Hayes again, but this time with a different expression, one filled with quiet regret. In that powerful silence, the truth began settling in, and the room started to feel the weight of what had just happened. Victoria Langford slowly stood up from her seat, her movements no longer confident, but heavy, as guilt began to take control of her earlier pride. Daniel Brooks looked up at Victoria Langford in confusion, not expecting such a reaction, as the tension in the room continued to grow deeper. Victoria Langford walked toward Robert Hayes, step by step, each movement carrying hesitation, as if facing a truth Victoria Langford had avoided. Robert Hayes watched quietly as Victoria Langford approached, his expression calm, showing neither anger nor resentment despite everything. Maya Carter stepped slightly aside, giving space, her eyes focused on the moment, sensing that something important was about to unfold. Victoria Langford stopped near the table and looked at the coins. then at Robert Hayes, her face now filled with visible regret. In a soft but clear voice, Victoria Langford apologized sincerely, admitting that judging Robert Hayes without knowing his story was wrong. The apology shocked everyone, especially Daniel Brooks, who sat frozen, realizing the situation had completely turned against his expectations. Robert Hayes listened quietly, then nodded slightly, accepting the apology with grace, showing a strength far greater than the insults he faced. Daniel Brooks lowered his gaze, unable to speak, as the weight of his actions now pressed heavily on his conscience in front of everyone. Maya Carter smiled faintly, knowing that respect had finally replaced arrogance, even if it came after a painful moment of truth. As the tension slowly eased, the room felt different now, as if everyone present had learned something they would not easily forget. Thomas Reed stepped forward again, but this time with humility, apologizing to Robert Hayes for the disrespect and harsh words spoken earlier. Robert Hayes looked at Thomas Reed calmly, then nodded once, accepting the apology without pride, showing quiet strength built over many years. Daniel Brooks slowly stood up, his face filled with regret, as Daniel Brooks realized the damage caused by careless words and cruel laughter. Victoria Langford placed money on the table respectfully, but not as charity, as a gesture of acknowledgement for the mistake Victoria Langford made. Maya Carter stood beside Robert Hayes, her eyes reflecting quiet pride, knowing that standing up for respect had changed everything in that moment. Several guests began clapping softly, the sound growing stronger, not for wealth, but for dignity, respect, and the truth revealed before them. Robert Hayes gently gathered his coins again, but this time his hands were steady, his dignity no longer questioned by anyone in the room. Thomas Reed assured Robert Hayes that the meal was honored fully, and that Robert Hayes would always be welcomed with respect and gratitude. Daniel Brooks quietly apologized as well, his voice low, finally understanding that true value is never measured by money or appearance. Maya Carter and Robert Hayes shared a quiet moment of understanding, a connection built not by words, but by simple human respect. The story ends here, but the mystery lives on. Like, subscribe, and return for the next unforgettable journey. And that night, everyone left with a lesson that dignity, respect, and kindness will always matter more than wealth, status, or pride.